So that's 7:30. Welcome to the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre online. Now, if you've been with us before, you might be wondering where Professor Lance Butler is. He's taking a little break this weekend, but we have a special guest, an old friend of the centre and the former president of the SSPR.
Yeah.
That's it. Nick Kyle. So Nick is going to be chairing the meeting tonight for Eamonn Ansbro. So I'll hand over to you, Nick. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so when I was a child, I realized that if I wanted to understand the mysteries of the universe, that all I had to do was lift my eyes. And yet I spoke to an awful lot of people who didn't do that. And then I met the late Professor Archie Roy. And I realized that he was a man who could explain the mysteries of the universe because he was an astronomer. And he had a fascination with the paranormal. And he passed away, much to my regret. I feel as if I've lost a grandfather. And then, about 2 years ago, I met Eamonn. And I realized I had, in a Glasgow expression, I had won a watch. I had been able to find another astronomer. And even more fascinating, Eamonn had a different take on paranormality from Archie Roy, a different focus. And I've learned a lot from listening to Eamonn, and I've not had an awful lot of opportunity, but I know how fascinating and resourceful he is and knowledgeable. So now when I look up into the sky and I wish upon a star, I know from Archie Roy and from Eamonn that some of these stars I'm looking at have died probably billions of years ago. And it's just the light that's hitting me now. That they're dead, just like some of the dreams and wishes that I've stacked on them. And I admitted to Eamonn just minutes ago that I still sit at night and look up at the stars when the clouds aren't around. And I wonder what's going on. Here's one man that's able to tell us. So over to you, Eamonn. I'm not going to read your CV, that was part of the publicity, but I'm really looking forward to you addressing not just what's up there, but how do we make contact? Over to you.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the invitation from the centre, and also thank you, Scott and Nick. Okay, my presentation to you is global communications with UAP or stroke UFOs and the possible link to extraterrestrial civilizations, non-human intelligence. Now, you see this other title there, ICER, which I'll brief you on. ICER is a very recent global organization and where I'm one of the national representatives for. And we've developed what we call the ICER Contact Project. So just to give you a brief, the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, or ICER, comprises of 30 national representatives from 30 countries. It's made up of scientists, academics, researchers, and we're a legal entity, an INGO based in Portugal. We're currently at this point in time talking to a sovereign state in order to support the announcement to the United Nations that not only is the UFO UAP a reality, but we need to action various things like setting up a UN office and having symposia for governments and agencies. because there's an awful lot of confusion out there in the world regarding this subject. So this will be a non-technical presentation, and if anybody is interested in further additional information, I can provide that through scientific papers or whatever, and in particularly dealing with the ISO Contact Initiative project. The project itself is made up of two groups within ISER. One is the science-based team, and the other is the contact team. Now, the whole approach for this global contact would need organization and structure behind it, but it also requires technologies, not just the human experience, the contactees, but we need a wide sensory system from people. Sorry, I just, yeah. So ISER is spearheading this without governments, military, or non-essential agencies, because there are already agendas there by these organizations. And when you're dealing with the whole extraterrestrial non-human intelligence area, you can be absolutely sure that this is being monitored at the moment by them. And I think if you were trying to attempt such a project like this, I don't think it'll get off the ground. So it has to be independent from other bodies like governments and the military. We'd also like to be recognized, hopefully eventually, as the official agent for and form of the United Nations to do with contact. The present time, in SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, they have the remit, and that is the SETI Permanent Committee of the International Astronautical Federation. So we have to be aware that we are being monitored, and there's an awful lot of evidence to show this, that we are being monitored by other intelligences out there, extraterrestrial or non-human intelligences. So it's important not to have any other hidden agendas working in this area. So in order to approach this subject, we need to be aware of the whole larger reality in life and in the universe. And, you know, we're living in an accepted society, it's reality, it's current sciences, it's official history, but there's an awful lot of material and experience from people that have been written about over the decades and even hundreds of years to do with what was in before recorded history, to do with megaliths and mythologies, and future prophecies, precognition, and even Earth, the collective consciousness, Earth energies. This is all very real. So the individual has its own reality. It depends actually how awake a particular individual is. So the more you're, how shall I say, awake and aware, one can glean a much larger reality in different aspects of it, you know, like for, say, to do with mind over matter or psychic experiences, past lives, reincarnation, UFO experiences, out-of-body experiences, channeling, and then after death, near-death experiences, spiritual communication. So that's what we're talking about in a larger reality. You could put it under, as the scientists would say, metaphysics, so which I'll briefly go into. Just going back to the event that's just happened recently, it's what I call the recognition event. It's the most consequential dragon king, as I would call it, in human history has arrived. This is to do with the whole UAP era. I mean, it's nothing new. It's just unfortunately the scientific community have completely been dumbed down regarding this whole arena. And but it has huge global circumstances on an unprecedented historical scale. So although SETI and astrobiology, these particular sciences are exploring, looking for discovering extraterrestrial life, but they completely play down the whole UAP area, or should I say, not so much them, but other authorities that have controlled the narrative regarding the UAP. So So the missing link is metaphysics. Metaphysics, which is the study of nature of reality, existence, and who we really are. And certainly in the last 70 or 80 years, quantum theory and quantum physics has shown that there are other dimensions here, which we would call metaphysical science. And there's enough proof now in the last 2 or 3 decades to show through, for example, the intention experiment, global coherent initiative. In other words, human thought can create changes, changes within the dynamics of the universe itself. So there's actually no escape from metaphysics itself. Metaphysics is needed in physics. Physics is in a crisis. Metaphysics, particularly dealing with, how should I put it, the quantum mechanics, is not only real, but the experiments have worked. Where in physics, yes, a lot of experiments have worked, but it's got to a point where there's a gap between the two of them. So back in the past, Kepler and Newton were involved in alchemy and metaphysics. That was accepted at the time. And Galileo was aware of that reality, but of course he took a safer route. That's the mechanistic science approach. And there was a transformation of the culture from metaphysics to, we'll call it physics and sciences, back in the 1830s, 1840s. So you ended up then after that period, that governments now were investing in resources in the sciences, in medicine and so forth, but leaving out of the equation metaphysics. So you're just left then with technicians, which we have ever since in the last 200 years. To deal with the observables dealing with UAPs and UFOs, indeed, there has been quite a lot of research has been done to do with patterns, particularly Bruce Cathey back in 1965 to do with his straight line theory, and Amy Michel back in 1959. There have been other theories since, and I've been involved in looking at cycles and patterns, and anybody who's interested in this material to do with cycles and patterns of UFOs, I have a number of published papers in that arena. But just to give you an idea, because there are very little theories on UFOs, but here's one in particular, not just as a theory and a model, but from an experimental point of view, does work as well. And basically the theory demonstrates that we have, we'll call them UFOs or constructs that are on specific orbital tracks that have been discovered through this model, and where they intersect around the Earth, that is the opportunity for events to take place. And this has been tried out. And I'll just go through what I'm talking about here. The actual, we'll call it, it's a controlled autonomous surveillance of the Earth. This was mooted back in 1968 by James McDonald, who was the principal scientist who shared a quote, which was that from the UFO research and his team over those 2 or 3 years, it suggested that there's some sort of surveillance of the Earth by UFOs. So he was an inspiration to a number of independent scientists in an invisible college, you could say. They couldn't be known that what kind of work they were doing. But the model shows that there's a synchronized, that the orbital tracks around the Earth are actually synchronized with the rotation of the Earth. Now, that's the key factor in this. That's different to artificial satellites. They're not synchronized with the rotation of the Earth. And the theory goes that we may have, say, a large type of craft, which is stealth in the upper stratosphere, which ejects a number of probes. Could be the one probe, a number of probes. These would be robotic type probes, and they drop down to a lower altitude. The Tic Tac possibly is a good example of that, where it had been recorded at 80,000 feet and then dropped down to a number of feet above the MSL, mean sea level, in a matter of 0.78 of a second. There is a paper actually on this, which got published with a lot of difficulty back in 2001. So the theory actually has been tried out in a number of countries, 27 locations in 8 countries, and we've had an 80% fit altogether. A lot of this work was done during the 1990s into the year 2000, and we've got recordings as well. Again, a lot of the stuff hasn't been, okay, some of it has been published all right, but there's been a lot of difficulty in publishing this kind of material due to the big taboo to do with UFOs in the scientific community. There has been instrumented UFO research over the decades. One of the earliest ones was Project Starlight International 1976, based in Texas. Then it led into Project Identification from Harley Rutledge from University of Lafayette, and got some interesting results from that. But one of the main ones has been Project Hestel in 1984. Although one has to be, I imagine at the time when these balls of light did appear in the Project Hestel research, they also discovered other things as well, which had nothing to do with the balls of light, but they were linked to them. And we're talking about triangular craft, cigar-type craft. Now, they were not put into published papers because of the taboo that's there. SETI Kingsland, year 2000, quite special operation here. This was set up specifically, this is in Ireland, by the way, Project Hestel was in Norway, was specifically set up at the intersection of the orbital tracks on the Earth, and there had to be one particular intersection, which was in Boyle in County Roscommon in the Republic of Ireland. And quite a lot of data was recorded. Some of this has been published, and gleaned a certain amount of information from it, which has helped actually to go into the whole communications field. Galileo Project, this was the initiative by Professor Avi Lowe from Harvard, which was only launched there in July of this year, and has caused a lot of interest, particularly with the recent congressional report that came out there just a week ago, which has set up an advisory committee dealing with the UAP area, and has advised having scientists from the Galileo Project. And also there's even another organization called the Society for Coalition for UAP, Scientific Coalition for UAP, and they've been invited onto this advisory board as well. So there's definitely a change in the outlook, certainly in mainstream, regarding this. So instrumental UFO research can glean quite a lot of information if you've got well-designed instrumentation. Now, you can't just offer any old instrumentation to this. You have to have an understanding of the UFO characteristics behind it. We're dealing with a space-time type of construct, different to our space-time. That's why for the many decades, people sort of wonder, well, you know, how can you get sharp images of UFOs? Well, you can't get sharp images of UFOs because they're in a different space-time to our space-time. That's why you've got distortion in it. But if everything goes well and they design the particular instrumentation right for this, I'm talking about the Galileo Project, then one could glean information to do with new aspects of physics, a wider range of the reality, new energy fields, and so forth. I have a couple of papers in this area, actually, going way back 17 years ago, based on the research done in SETI Kingsland. In SETI Kingsland, this is what was set up back in 2001, an all-sky camera system made of 11 cameras and 2 tracking platforms, 150 meters apart, and other sensors dealing with the infrared and also gamma ray detection as well, because it has been noted as one of the characteristics is gamma rays emitted from UFOs. And certainly where you have close encounters that have taken place, some people have had rashes due to the encounter. That's where the gamma rays come in. So that's just giving you a flavor of another operation dealing with that. Just recently, I'm involved in the new robotic telescopes out in Spain. And really, I think I've been triggered by the Galileo Project. and where they're also planning to use large telescopes in specific locations where there's hot activity taking place. And so I've decided actually we're going to use one of the telescopes here in southern Spain for this kind of work. And mind you, there would have to be some modifications to it, because you can't just use any old sort of research grade telescope for this, because it's specifically designed for what it was, dealing with astronomy and stars, where you have very slow slewing rates and tracking. But when you're dealing with a UAP, you're dealing with could be a fast moving object. So it would have to be designed differently. So just jumping on to typical characteristics of UFOs, they go through different colors, different resonances, which show up as different colors. Particularly, for example, this has been commonly seen where the construct, a UFO, has been rising from the Earth and going through these different colors. Now, the thing is, one has to take consideration that the velocities that we're dealing with here are absolutely astronomical. And this has been shown up even in recent papers by the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. So if that's the case, then we may be dealing with faster than light type of travel here. And if that's the case, then in our space-time, okay, you probably could accelerate within our space-time up to the speed of light, but you'd need to jump into what we call hyperspace. So as physical beings, we're living in space-time. So if you were on one of these craft, you'd accelerate to the speed of light, which actually would take quite a bit of time to do, I would imagine. It could be an hour, it could be a number of hours, and you're trying to target to a particular stellar system that you may have originally have come from. The hyperspace part is where there's no time. And then when you're decelerating, again, you'll be a slow period of time before you get to the stellar system. Now, we're going on the basis here, hypothetically, that we're dealing with advanced extraterrestrial civilizations that have been very much cooperative in their own planetary system and are expanding out, rather like we're expanding out within our own solar system. But I think in this case, we're dealing with extraterrestrials that are interstellar travelers. So if you're an interstellar traveler, it's most unlikely you're going to use conventional type of travel that we're using at the present time, using fuel rockets. You'd have to be using something else. And this also fits in with some sort of communication that certainly would be futile to use the electromagnetic spectrum. In other words, using communications that we're so used to on the Earth, using radio, microwave, and so forth. So the most likely thing, again, this is all hypothetical, but certainly when you study the whole UFO area and in some detail, that there's a number of characteristics that do show up that the occupants are probably actually consciously linked to the actual craft itself and or resonating with the craft consciously. So we're dealing with a craft that's probably conscious when it's in its operation due to being triggered by, say, the occupants that are also operating in the consciousness area. And so we're dealing with a terminology called superluminal communication. In other words, faster than light communications. So as I mentioned earlier, that it would be futile to use normal communications in the electromagnetic spectrum. You'd have to be using some sort of faster than light communications, certainly when you're traveling these astronomical distances. So one of the essential things, if we are to develop our consciousness for contact work, or maybe it's irrelevant for those who've already had contact, of course, but if we want to learn further, we need to develop our consciousness to lead into a wider spectrum of reality or a larger reality. So one of the characteristics that we do have in common with extraterrestrials and non-human intelligence in this universe is that humans and extraterrestrials have non-linear concepts, and that is we're awake, we're aware, and conscious of the universe itself. And they're also in that arena as well. And it has been shown that scalar waves, longitudinal waves, which are emitted by human beings, part of our communications, you could say, with one another, most likely is what the extraterrestrials and non-human intelligences are using as well. So they're not using transverse waves in the electromagnetic spectrum. There has been some development in this area on a very rudimentary scale of a quantum superluminal communication system using longitudinal waves. This still is in work in progress. There is some Chinese scientists that are working in the quantum communications, but in one of the recent paper, they have shown that they've indicated that quantum superluminal communication is possible to do. So don't be surprised you might hear something from the Chinese regarding this. So back to where we are at the present time on Earth, in our own, as physical beings in our own space-time. So where, if you're using the electromagnetic spectrum, you're completely constrained as to the communications, particularly the distance to other stars. You're dealing with light years, and light year and time is a big constraint. But also because we're living in this physical reality in this space-time, it also has dimensions in it. Now, if you're using quantum superluminal communication, that's completely different. You're not only just communicating within our space-time, but you can operate in the multiverse. In other words, other realities that also have its dimensions as well. So it actually opens up a huge arena in the communications area. So although we may be at the edge of our own galaxy, which the major axis is 100,000 light years across, and we're actually just on the very edge, in fact. So if you try to communicate to somebody 100,000 light years away, that would be instantaneous through the major axis itself. So it's all down to, the communication is all down to consciousness resonance. And that's, I feel, is the key to this as a tool within the two-way communications with extraterrestrials. There is another tool I'll be bringing in later on in this discussion, which actually will support this. So if we're successful in this area, we could actually eavesdrop onto other extraterrestrial groups in their spacecraft, so to speak. That's quite possible. In fact, if we're picking them up, they'll probably pick us up as well. The opportunity is there for two-way communications, if we know how to do that, and that's something I'll go into later on. But one of the key things, actually, which is the missing link, in which I mentioned here earlier on, is the metaphysics. You need to combine two disciplines in science, that is the scientific and the experiential. So the contemporary scientist is purely geared towards the mechanistic world, not the larger reality in life. Where a co-creative scientist, which there are extremely few of them, is the mechanistic plus the experiential. So just to give you some clarity on this, in order to, so you're aware that the scientist is not connected with nature intelligence. Nature intelligence is so important in this factor. I'm convinced the extraterrestrials and non-human intelligence are using this as a normality. It's part of their reality. We're not doing these type of things, but we can do it as human beings. So so we can set up a definition, a direction and purpose with nature intelligence as a partnership with nature intelligence as part of the co-creative process. So co-creative, the new co-creative scientists, when they apply this particular tool, will find to their astonishment it actually works. So that's still in its complete infancy at this point in time. So currently, this is to do with first contact. Currently, the SETI Permanent Committee of the International Astronautical Federation is the only agency that has the remit to inform the United Nations. I'm hoping, actually, being part of ISER, is that we could be officially become the agency to inform the United Nations. Hopefully, we might get the first contact. I have my grave doubts SETI and by the way, I'm actually part of the SETA community, will achieve what they're trying to do. So for the post-contact protocols requires quantum superluminal communications, and this needs to operate in real time. So by doing that, this can lead into the scientific and intercultural exchange with extraterrestrials, UAP, non-human intelligences. So it needs a preparation of mankind for the worldwide first contact. So the first contact means that we may become part of the cosmic community. So there's, okay, we've had sensitization regarding this through the media and conferences and so forth. And we also need the preparations for the communications through networks. And also the first contact would be the beginning of the exchange that we need. So the sensitization has come about for quite a few decades now to do research and studies, publish papers, certainly in the SETA community and in science fiction, the media. When you look at a lot of the so-called extraterrestrial UFO type of documentaries of movies, 50% of them are dealing with, the whole, extraterrestrial area. Some of the blockbusters you'd be familiar with. But it's been, so we have been sensitized through magazines, newspapers, movies, etc. So the initiative is would be a declaration of principles for the first contact task group. This is what would need to be set up for these preparations. So we need to raise awareness within the global community for this. Post-contact protocols, which I'll go into a little bit further. And this would enable our communication with extraterrestrials and UAP. I'm not saying extraterrestrials are part of the UAP, they could well be, but because we may actually have the UAP has been here, could be for a millennium, or we've only just been aware of it now, but it has shown up historically. So we need to create networks and connect and cooperate. And we can have an all sort of range of experts in the field, not just scientists, but engineers and artists and poets and such like. And this would be in preparation for the first worldwide contact. So mankind will be publicly informed about the existence of contact from ISA, we're hoping, through these scientific protocols. And this would be through the announcement to the United Nations. The phase 4 would be the new era. That's mankind will enter a new era, becoming maybe a new member of the cosmic community. So we can begin then intercultural and scientific exchange. That's once we've got the contact and we know who we're dealing with. I know I'm putting this over in a very simplistic way, but there's been an awful lot of research gone into this behind the scenes. So the upcoming change would be the ramifications for structures and institutions that we know of on Earth in society. And so this also opens up all the possibilities for people for connecting up as well. So before first contact, there's the preparation process needed. After the contact, we would need committees set up for this, agendas put in place, and also specific centers around the world where you'd have scientists and engineers, artists, and so forth. I'm actually whizzing through this because it might take up too much time in this talk, but so assuming we've gone through phases 2 and 3, we'll want to find out who are they, where do they come from, why are they communications, the importance of communications and technology, the role of worldwide communication centers. These would be important. These would be nodal points around the Earth as communication centers. And then we can begin the intercultural and scientific exchange with representatives of the ET civilization, or which could well be maybe one of the UAP groups. So what can we expect in progressing the communications? Well, you'd have this on as I mentioned, on a global scale, on continents, live streaming. And so there'd be a certain action would have to take place on a global basis, have to be very well organized. So, so the ISO contact nature is selecting the nodal points, that is the global centers around the Earth, because it has to be on a 24/7 basis. It's not going to stop on a Sunday. Communication will have to go on all the time. So you have global communications. You'd have to select the right contactees. Now, it doesn't have necessarily to have to be an extraterrestrial type of contactee. People that have a wide sensory system can be trained in as communication operatives. And at a later stage, then if not just the discovery, but also the breakthrough to do quantum superluminal communications technology, that can be brought into place as well. That would actually support the communication operatives, but it could still be done without that technology. So the centers, again, the whole foundation for doing something like this is the ethics, supporting living in harmony and peace with the creation, and addressing all humans at all ages from all different cultures. And this would help to deepen the contacts with the ET civilization from the scientific and the intercultural exchange. And so this would be the supporting interface and so forth. And it's all for the benefit of mankind. So training communications operative or the contactee needs, the experiencer needs to resonate at certain stable frequencies. So one would have to go through a selection process, and maybe technology could be involved in this. So you have an objective result to show that the person is resonating at the right frequencies for this to take place. You could say it's like selecting the right astronauts, selecting the right pilots. So this is the way I would propose for this. Well, I've certainly proposed it on ISO. So what I'm actually sharing tonight is very recent, but it's a concept at the present time. But I feel it is actually doable. So resonance is important and for the human being, and this will provide the interface with the extraterrestrials. So although it's these are theoretical principles, but it also has a practical side to all this. So it's important to the exchange of thoughts and emotions and the sense impressions between the two groups, between the extraterrestrials and ourselves. So the intention is, so it's an intention-based form of communication, the importance of emotions, and to develop the cooperation. We ask questions to ETs and ETs ask questions of us. So this could be, okay. So again, the right attitude, raising awareness, being respectful, being curious, good intention. So these would be part of the post-contact protocols that we're dealing with here. So focusing our attention, focus on the dialogue with your partner. So there'd be 5 steps in the communication: exchange information and check possible alterations. Step 2 would be interpretation. Step 3 would be reevaluation, and step 4, adaptation. And then step 5 would be going back to step 1 and then closing the dialogue. So you'd have a certain cycle in this, in the communications: interpretation, reevaluation, adaptation. So the 5 steps have to be understood as a cycle of understanding for this to take place. So you're integrating knowledge, learning, and exchange of information. So the 5 steps in communications would be a universal code of conduct, which is taught anyway in nations through, well, the United Nations. So every young person would have known this. So in the scientific and the intercultural communications, we would need a wide range of experts from many fields, from philosophy to physics to engineering to quantum technologies, medicine, artists, information technology. So this would be important for ISA to take the first initiative for mankind. This is not an ego trip, by the way. This has been discussed within ISA. And for the first time, this was presented literally only 3-4 weeks ago in Barcelona, where ISO had its physical launching. So it's, we have to know actually who is going to coordinate this response. And this is why it's important for ISA to lead into the United Nations with hopefully the support of one sovereign state that we're talking to at the present time that's actually interested in this, to do see the benefits in it. So it's actually, I can't mention the state at the moment because it's still in discussions privately, confidentially. But all I can say, it is one sovereign state in Europe. So hopefully with the breakthrough of quantum superluminal communications, this would be a disruptive technology, and that can be applied to the whole ET UAP area, providing real-time communications. So, so as I was saying earlier, the ET civilization would have their own agendas. There's a reason why they're here, why their behavior, the psychology behind what's going on at the present time, and even in historically as well. And so we also need to know what our agenda is as well. So I think I've made it, have I, in a matter of 40 minutes or something? I can't. So that's the end of it, and I hope that opens up a lot of questions.
Thank you, Eamonn, and thank you right at the start for doing a non-technical presentation, because I was able to follow it more easily than the kind of presentation you're probably used to giving to fellow academics. Can I ask you to stop sharing your screen?
Sure.
So that we can see the gallery of 40-odd participants? Yeah, and we can see you very clearly, and I'm just going to go for a gallery view myself. Okay, lots of questions in different aspects of your talk, and a couple of them have come from Peter Braun. He wonders why Seth Shostak of SETI has ignored so much of the recent UAP proof. But he's got a longer question on the Galileo project, so I'm going to let Peter ask the questions that he wants to.
Hi, Eamonn. Thanks for an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it, and like Nick, even my wee mind could cope with it up to a point, but I got most of it. Thank you. It's to do with the politics of ufology, or the world of UAP these days. Your organisation is a relatively new departure. We do seem to be living at a time of considerable change in the area, though, with vast implications for humanity and our understanding of our own nature and the universe, and our relationship with perhaps probably other alien civilizations. We've noticed since December the 17th, 2017, when the New York Times published its explosive report on the observation of alien craft and the encounters between American naval operatives and pilots off San Diego in 2004, with accompanying videos. I imagine most of the people here tonight, many of people here tonight would have seen those videos, because they've been hitting the screens regularly for the past 4 years now. Since then, there's been a report which was published recently. An official report was eventually required, curiously, by Trump as one of his last outgoing acts. He required the American defense agencies to get together and say what they knew about it. Of course, what they eventually only published was if you like, it was a draft summary. It was an executive summary of what their understanding was. But there was one crucial fact, was that they had focused on just 144 cases of American military and UAP entities, and they could only disprove one of them, which is grossly encouraging, I think, for all of us who are concerned with the reality of this. but it remains quite it still remains a very complicated area, doesn't it? My question was to do with the people who are leading it. And a lot of them come with baggage, or they curiously perhaps come without any baggage at all, which is even more mystifying in the case of Lou Elizondo. How do you actually choose who should be in the new organization, which seems like a really exciting departure? Who can be trusted and who has enough skill and knowledge to be in the vanguard of taking us into this very exciting sphere?
Okay, there's a number of questions in this, I can see. Okay, the first one is, and you brought up an example earlier on there about Seth Shostak. You have to realize that the SETI community, in fact, I'm actually part of it, is terribly constrained. It's a mechanistic approach. They're dealing with the electromagnetic spectrum. They have no, okay, as individuals, I know quite a lot of them, they have no experience of the larger part of life. You know, and what I just mentioned in my earlier slides to do with outside the box, outside our, you know, our normal reality, so society's consensus reality. So that has been a huge problem. Now, of course, you know, one has to respect where all these guys are coming from. And to answer your later question there, who would one pick? I wouldn't pick any of them because, okay, there are organizations that would suit them. For example, the Society, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which is made up of scientists mainly, but a lot of them have been inspired by the whole UFO area historically, and that's part of the reason why they went it. They knew there was a gap there, that there was a problem, and they need to do something about it. And some of these guys have been, well, are ufologists as well. They may have physics backgrounds and so forth. And some of them have been operating in an invisible college because, you know, it's been a complete taboo we're dealing with. The other exciting thing is actually was Avi Loeb, a really brave, courageous guy, which is a complete departure from SETI. And in fact, I couldn't help, I was actually on a conference there. It was from Chile, and Jill Tarter, who was one of the key, you know, persons in SETI, and he was arguing with her. And in fact, to a degree that she just was, how shall I put it? I've never seen an argument in a conference between two individuals that's not normal. It wasn't a scientific argument. It was more personalized, and he had to apologize at the end. So you can see Avi Loeb is not censoring himself. He's I think he's an authentic guy that is not censoring himself and is just coming out with it, where the likes of all these SETI people are censoring themselves because they've got salaries, you know, they've got pensions and all this kind of stuff. They've got to keep within their team, their community. That has been the problem. It's just like in society. The problem is that we have a consensus reality. They're not stepping outside the box. Well, I think that's changing. I think the UAP is a very good example of that, as you quite rightly said, in the last 4 years, of that we can be, it provides the opportunity of going outside the box now. And I can't remember your other questions. So
can I just mention Avi Loeb, just to finish as a sort of supplementary observation? I mean, everyone here will know about Oumuamua, however you pronounce it, which was the large rock, or was it a craft that came into the Earth's object? Apparently the only visitation we've ever had from an an object from out with our solar system. Loeb notoriously or famously said he thought it was entirely possible that this was an alien craft. And of course that created headlines around the world. And you have to imagine that Loeb in his position now is doing that deliberately, and he knows that he's being perhaps deliberately controversial to attract attention to the subject and to himself and to his own activities. But I sort of wondered about, without going into the personalities too much, about Mellon and Elizondo being his partners at Harvard on the Galileo Project, but maybe leave that to the side.
Yeah, as you quite rightly said, Peter, that both Chris Mellon and Luis Elizondo are now affiliates in the last 2 or 3 weeks, with the Galileo Project. And just interesting enough, there's another 4 guys there in the last few days. One of them is Nick Pope, and he's been accepted in it. I know. And when I saw that, and then I saw this other guy, Michael Sharman, who's complete skeptic on UFOs. Why is he in there as well? So yeah, it's really puzzling.
Well, at least the British Secret Services are represented, so we can take some comfort in that.
Yeah, I do know that regarding ICER, well, I'll just say this to the audience, that we've had a number of conversations with Luis Elizondo. And one of the problems actually for ICER, because it's so international, one of the countries, Russia, is problematic for the United States. And we are trying to actually getting support by some aspects of the US government to support ICER when it comes to our discussions at the present time with the sovereign state in Europe.
Well, Russia's been a lot more open about the subject than America's ever been, infinitely so.
Yeah. So I think actually, Peter, that, and quite a few of us here have actually followed, this whole arena for a long time, and, with frustration behind it. ICER is probably, well, this is my own opinion, mind you, I think certainly provided me the opportunity of going into an organization. I was so happy to be the actual co-founder to actually develop this, to spearhead Pacific, to spearhead the UAP area to the degree that, we leave behind all the confusion out there with the media and the confusion with the scientific community. They're still at it. And so to spearhead this with new frontiers, we have a vision on what we're trying to do. And we don't want passengers and baggage behind us in doing this. I mean, personally, I haven't even approached Avi Loeb regarding should I be an affiliate. People have been asking me that over the last 2 or 3 months. And I said, no, I want to see actually how this is going to unfold first in the Galileo Project. There's no point jumping into an organization just because it just started, thinking, well, this is the way it's going to be. In my opinion, that's an astrophysical approach to it. And regarding people who have been saying, about disclosure, the big D, disclosure. Disclosure won't come about through the government or governments. It'll be citizens' initiatives making discoveries. Now, the Galileo Project, you could say, is a citizens' initiative. It's non-military. Okay, there's probably a link with the government to some degree, but it's through discoveries that are going to be made. That's where the disclosure will take place, not from the government.
Can I come in there, Eamonn, and say that there are 3 different questions in the chat which are linked to the idea of communication as a result of conscious practices. So Elizabeth Cooksey was asking, is QSC similar to channeling? And Julie in the audience, I think, has some experience of that. So if you want to speak to her about what her experience is, I'm sure we can ask her to contribute. But just before I finish the question, I noticed that Robert Steck has been wondering to what extent would taking drugs such as DMT be involved in successful communication? Could you comment on channeling and drug use? And if any of these questioners want to add to the question, then please feel free to do so.
Yeah.
Eamonn?
Okay. Well, you have different categories of communications. And as you quite rightly said, channeling is one thing. But it has been shown that channeling, how shall I put it, is very much diluted of what you're dealing with here. You're dealing with another level of your higher self in channeling. Now, there are extreme exceptions to this, and I'm just thinking of Edgar Casey as one back in the 1930s and 40s. But there you have from one extreme part of the spectrum, the channelers, all the way right up to the 3D encounters that take place. We're talking about physical encounters now with the craft and with the beings, the occupants as well. So there's okay, there's certain now. Okay, this is not a cop out, but this really is a complex area to do with communication. You have to differentiate between all the different categories, and I think actually in the case of what ICER or what we're trying to do in ICER, and by the way, this is still a work in progress at the present time, is that you'd have to have the right people that are resonating at the right frequencies for this to take place. I know we live in a yin and yang situation, so we don't want to end up with all these negative, malevolent sort of extraterrestrials. We're this need. Let's put it this way: there's a baseline or foundation in the universe, and it's all positive. But there's also all the other aspects as well that we are aware of as living creatures here. So sorry, I'm not actually answering the question properly, but channelers is one thing. Not too happy with the channeling side for communications with extraterrestrials. I know there are thousands of channelers out there. I've met quite a lot of them over the last 30 years, and I've never been too happy about it because you're not actually getting the results, so to speak. Where on the extreme end with close encounters with physical craft, that is very valuable. And only just recently, I had a guy from Bolivia I just met there just 4 or 5 weeks ago, who has had with somebody else a close encounter with the craft and the occupants. And it's these type of people I've been exploring and wanting to meet, so that it gives me some sort of insight what we were dealing with here. Channeling, I'm not too happy with, but close encounters with physical craft, I would be much happier to deal with.
And what about drug use such as DMT and ET communications? Is there any role for that? Ayahuasca?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're using psilocybin or ayahuasca and you're exploring inner space, and it really depends actually what your attitude and your approach to this before you even start. If you're just seen as recreational activities, it won't work. I think there's a lot of preparation you have to do before you take ayahuasca and psilocybin, etc. What I've seen over the 20 years that people that go into this, and some of them I've met, but they're done, as human beings, they still have a lot of baggage behind them. I think you have to go through a process of addressing a lot of your issues. And I'm talking about the dark side. There's no point going to the light. You need to deal with the dark side. So, this goes beyond the whole new agey people.
My question,
oh,
sir.
Sorry. Yes.
My question had specifically to do with DMT, because one of the most striking characteristics of people who have used DMT is that there is frequently an encounter with what they describe as an alien intelligence, with different reactions to being ignored, to being welcomed, to being questioned, but it seems to be a very common experience. And I'm wondering if this is a communications channel, or if anyone within your community has looked at this or have any experience with it.
Yeah, well, that is actually one of the categories that we are exploring. It's one of many categories, in fact. And so it's not really ruling out using the tool of the DMT approach to it, because it is inner space, which has an effect on outer space as well. So yeah, I do respect the DMT approach as well to this as a category.
Anything you want to add, Robert?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Robert, sorry, Robert, this is a really complex one. You know, it's still in its infancy. It's the whole contact arena. There's no doubt about it. There's very few scientists in the field, and I mean, I can think of about 20 that I know of that are actually in the field dealing with contact. You probably heard of, or may have read the report, the FREE report, you know, dealing with a survey of 4,000 contactees. You know, it does say a lot for where it's coming from, which is the encounters have been positive in, I think, 80% of the cases.
Can I ask if Elizabeth Cooksey wants to add to her question?
Yes, I'm still not clear. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. I'm still not clear what quantum superluminal contact is. Okay, it's obviously stronger if you're in contact with somebody in a spacecraft, but is there any sort of knowledge about how the contact occurs? Is it through energy fields, and what is it, your energy fields that's resonating? I'm not quite clear what you mean.
Oh, hi, Elizabeth. Yeah, this is just terminology used maybe in the scientific circles,
Right.
you know, quantum superluminal communication. In plain language, it's faster than light communication, or using your consciousness as a thought process is faster than light anyway.
Yes.
You know, so that's to answer your question. Yes.
Is it more like telepathy then?
Yes. Yeah, very much so. In
Okay.
fact, most of the close encounters, not just the physical side of it, but telepathy comes into it. Yeah. And you don't actually have to, how shall I put it? You don't have to speak to an extraterrestrial in the sense of, you know, using your mouth and audio and so forth, just the thought process alone. And it's actually to develop telepathy and train oneself in that area would be the right approach, actually, if you're dealing with communications with extraterrestrials, for example.
Because I was wondering if you are in your project seeking out people who have more powers, and because it's very variable, it's got normal human range probably, and there will be
yeah you're right, Elizabeth. Yeah, it's muscles within our consciousness that have been dumbed down. We have those faculties there. Yes. And you're quite right, not just telepathy, but there's other categories of you know, in the psychic field can be used. So yeah, you'd need a wide sensory system, which would include, say, telepathy, which would be great. And that would be part of the foundation as a communications operative.
Well,
I don't want to put Julie Lindsay on the spot, but I did mention her chat message earlier about channeling or communicating with Stella, and I just want to give her the opportunity to come in on that if she wishes. Julie Lindsay? No? Okay. Audrey Yardley, sorry for mispronouncing, asked a question early on in the chat, Eamonn, about, do you think the numbers of satellites would hinder any alien communication or any kind of communication with extraterrestrials?
I don't think so, because when you're dealing with our satellites, which I think you mentioned there, you're dealing with a physical construct within our space-time. When you're dealing with extraterrestrials and their craft, there's a lot to show they're in a different space-time. It's not an issue for any problem with our satellites. I don't see where that comes into it, really. But I hope that answers it. It's a very interesting question. Yeah, never had that one before. But,
our very own Antra Hearn wondered early on, do you have UAP footage that has not been broadcast across the world that you find to be evidential? You might not be able to show us tonight, although that would be wonderful, but you might be able to tell us how much additional evidence you've seen.
Okay, most of the evidence I've seen has been interacting with others over the last 30 years. And indeed, I have seen footage, which has been confidential in some cases. Quite a few of these people that I've investigated. By the way, I carried out 150 cases altogether over 10 years. And some of this had footage in it. One of the problems I found actually with most of the footages is that you're dealing with very light, very bright type constructs, and you couldn't see any proper structure behind them as such. Now, that may have been in the early days back in the 90s, but I have relied actually on others, you know, with their footages, and have interacted with some of these people. And how shall I put it? It's, for me, personally, it's not so much having the most sharpest of images here. I think I have enough information to know what's going on dealing with this arena. I know in society we're expecting, you know, crisp, clean, crystal clear images of craft. I don't think you'll get it. But I may be wrong, but you know.
Well, we would if we gave the production over to Peter Braun, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you shaking his head. No. Gavin Ritchie has asked a fulsome question, and I'd like Scott to unmute him so that he can ask you in his own words. Gavin Ritchie.
Hi, Eamonn.
Hello there, Gavin.
Hi. Yeah, when you originally described the quantum superluminal communication, you described it as technology. You said there was some research going on in China. And so perhaps this question has been answered by some of the things that have followed. But really at that point, I mentioned that my understanding was that the only thing that science currently recognized that happened faster than light, or certainly instantly, was what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. So when you measured a local entangled particle and you instantly knew the state of the remote quantum particle, however far away it was. And I know there's been a fair bit of research in that area to demonstrate that, yes, this really happens, and that it isn't just that by measuring the local one, you find something out about the remote one. It's by measuring the local one, you instantly resolve the state of the local and the remote one at that point. And until you do it, they're both in an unknown state. And obviously, people have wondered whether that sort of mechanism could be used for communication. But I thought the explorations in that area were that if you measure one, then you find something out instantly about the remote one, but it's one shot. You can't then tweak the local one and it sends a message to the remote one. That was my understanding. It was just a one-shot deal, a one-shot measurement. So I wondered what the technology you talked about in quantum superluminal communication was going to build on, what the quantum part of it was.
Okay, right. Yeah, well, as you know, the Chinese did a demonstration back in 2016 in quantum communications, transmitting the data, from a satellite to 3 receivers in Tibet, and they actually achieved this, encrypted type of communications. Now, the same team apparently have been exploring this QST area as well, and in a recent paper, it's quite difficult. So some of these papers, by the way, are in Chinese, so you'd have to get them translated. But I do know, like other scientists in the West wouldn't be actually, they think it's impossible, this whole arena still. Well, the Chinese are spearheading this at the present time. So they see the superluminal part as a superluminal form beyond the quantum state. And they know what they've achieved so far in quantum computing and quantum communications, but they see that as the next step. And there is a paper to show that this is very real, that it can be done. But they have to experiment with this first to actually prove it. Now, that's the Chinese. Now, here's the bit you don't know about, is that I've been actually working in this field. This is now with another colleague of mine, Dr. Hugh Deasy, since 2016. We actually looked at different forms of communication, which included, believe it or not, I know some of you guys would be in the paranormal, but into the transdimensional arena. The problem, okay, we did actually set up equipment in that area back in 2016, based on others, what they were doing. But we were very unhappy actually with the results. We did get results, but it was like listening to yourself, so to speak. So that was abandoned there in 2016, 2017. So we're actually developing the precursor experiment before the QSC, and that is, and you can take note of this, Gavin, if you wish, it's called telephone anti-telephone. And when you check it up on Wikipedia, they'll say, well, you know, this is just hypothetical, it's impossible. Well, we're actually working on this with another university in Munster University in County Kerry. And we're optimistic we might make the breakthrough. We have about 80% of the machine put together all right, but there's just this last part we weren't too sure about. So that's why we've partnered with Munster University on this, whom have expertise in electronic engineering and so forth. So if we get this actual part right, then we can plug that into the machine that we have. See, that there's the problem actually is this Doppler effect we're trying to overcome. We're trying to go back in time, but also to go ahead in time as well. So in theory, we're optimistic that we could go ahead in time, you know, not just by seconds, but could be two or 3 hours. So I think in 2022, we might have the breakthrough in it. So I'm just sharing this with you guys now because it's complete behind the scene. It's not in the public arena. We're not publishing any papers in it. We might do if we made the breakthrough. We might do. We're not too sure. But this has been specifically designed and built for the communication with extraterrestrials.
Eamonn, Annette Johnson has asked, and I would invite Jo to unmute her if she wishes to ask her own question. Annette?
Hi there.
Hi, Annette.
Hi, Eamonn. Hi,
there.
everybody. Yes, I have been watching quite a few of the programs, and especially the ones with Louis Elizondo and I think it's Chris Mellon. And they keep implying that these UAPs are a threat or could be a threat. And I just wondered why, when obviously we've had UAPs coming for, well, in the public knowledge for 50 years, 60 years at least. So why do they have to keep saying they're a threat? But I see Peter answered my question as well. He said that they obviously have to maybe use this fear of maybe UAPs being a threat in order to gain funding. And also it's a military thing, you know, that they're all from America and the military, but they keep implying it could be Russia, it could be China. But then again, it might not. And, you know, they just make, to me, they're making fear where there isn't any.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much, thanks, Annette. It's very much an American-centric approach to it. It's a cultural thing. That doesn't apply to a lot of other countries. And I'm dealing with a lot of countries dealing with this, and they don't see it that way at all. They see it in a very positive way. Not there is actually no evidence to show that has been a threat.
Exactly.
And so therefore, it's not a threat. But for the Americans, the government, okay, they're indicating that, but it's not a threat. And I'm actually hoping that, you know, ISA or others can change the narrative in this area as time goes on. Because all we hear about is mainly from the US. And yeah, and of course the recent, thanks Peter, yeah, the UFOs and nukes. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean it was a threat. It could be one of two things. This correlation between UFOs and nuclear missiles.
Yeah.
Some of you would be familiar with some of this historically, showing that either they, you know, can stop the missiles, you know, being active. Even Rendlesham Forest incident has shown that they made the the nuclear part of the weapon storage area, neutralized it,
Yes.
and transformed it into iron. There's I've actually met two of the on occasions some of the missile operators over the years, like Robert Salas, who's been very outspoken in this field, of course, very recently. But I asked him about that about 3 or 4 years ago in Bulgaria at a conference, and he said no, he didn't see it as a threat at all. It was more of a demonstration of what we're doing.
Yes, I would agree with that too. Thank you, Eamonn. Thank you.
You're welcome, Anna. Yeah.
Peter, you asked a question to follow up on the people who are leading some of the investigations or research projects. Do you want to elaborate on that for Eamonn?
Yeah, I was picking up on the communication theme that was emerging strongly there. If we go back to the Stanford experiments, the Stargate experiments at Stanford, Eamonn, that you'll be very aware of. Mm-hmm. I think it was the 80s, wasn't it? The late 80s, maybe into the 90s.
Yeah.
They were experimenting with seers, people who could see at a distance and say very accurately what was going on at a distance, and that seemed to be very much heading in the direction of you know, quantum communication rather than conventional communication. And one of the key figures there was Hal Puthoff, another enigmatic figure, because he was also a big Scientologist. I don't know if he still is, but he's been very involved in To the Stars Academy, and he's a close associate of Mellon and Elizondo and so on. So has that been part of, I mean, is there a direct connection there with some of the people who were involved in the Stargate stuff, Eamonn?
Sorry, what was your question?
Is your organization connected through any of the personalities who were involved in the Stargate stuff back in the 80s?
No, but the new organization was only just launched 4 months ago.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, but the people who are in the orbit of it, are they?
Yeah, it's quite. Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with the creme, and you can check them all up. There is the ISO network website, but you're dealing with the creme de la creme, actually, to do with researchers around the world that've been at a hell of a long time. So they have a range of expertise, not just ufology as such, but consciousness comes into it. There is an expert in that area, a really good guy from Peru, Giorgio Pianziano, and then there's one of the key figures in it is there's 3 contactees, but one in particular who's a national representative for, I'll give it away, of New Zealand, and quite amazing actually the process that this person has gone through for a lifetime. And I've certainly learned, I'm not a contactee myself, but I've made it my duty to explore this whole area of dealing with the contactees, and particularly from the 3D side, physical encounters, because that gives you a hell of a lot of insight of what's going on. Not channelers. I've dealt with about 15 channelers back in the 1990s, and I wasn't too happy with a lot of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But anybody I've dealt with to do with the whole 3D encounters, physical, that has fascinating stuff in it. And yeah, I'm not too sure to answer your question to do it remote viewing.
No, it does. I mean, I suppose you're making a distinction there, interestingly, between channeling and communicating, which is quite fundamental to your thinking, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a lot of the accounts, the more reputable accounts of UFO experiences from contactees, involves sublime communication, non-verbal communication, mental communication, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And I just share something else with you, which will interest you. And there has been a number of intel people have come forward in recent years who, when you study them carefully, their interviews, they have indicated that they have channeled. I can mention a couple of names, actually. You can check up on this. One is Angeli, I think it is, Schultz, came forward there claiming that, okay, she was in the intelligence community for 20 years, probably in some branch of the CIA, because it's very, it's quite a wide umbrella. And I suspect, and I've been studying her interviews and what she's saying and everything very carefully, and I think she's a definite channeler. And also, there's another guy, Ramirez, John Ramirez, who only came out there a few months ago, and some interviews. And when you explore further, he's a contactee. And now, when you identify these people, and then you look at Luis Elizondo and the ATIP, where the ATIP started in 2006 and finished in 2012, these people were well aware of ATIP. I'm absolutely convinced about that, because you're dealing with the whole UAP area, UFO area. And secondly, like yourself and many others here have looked at the Luis Elizondo's interviews, and there's been quite an evolution in his interviews from the early days to now. And there was one actually that really, and it hasn't been talked about at all. Maybe, if you study this quite intensely, if you look at the 5-day marathon on making contact, which was set up by Sims and Sheehan, I think it was, 5-day. Luis Elizondo is one of the speakers in it. And he was asked a question by the audience, and this is virtual now, and I couldn't help noticing that in the question, and I can't remember it exactly, but the answer to it, he actually signaled as if he was winking, or signaled, is that, yes, I'm a contactee, or like a channeler or something. Sorry, a channeler, I mean. But the way the question was posed, you'd have to look at it really carefully. He hesitated, and then he signaled like as if he was winking or something, with a smirk. And I thought, wow, people haven't noticed this. I noticed it, and I thought, my God, he's a channeler as well.
It sounds like a sort of intergalactic Freemasonry, Eamonn.
Yeah, and when you think of it, Peter, when you look at all the people that have been involved, I actually mentioned on a forum there a while back that every US air pilot that's had an encounter physically, there's quite a few of them. I'm convinced, and I got quite an agreement on this just a few months ago on a forum, that every one of those has had contact. Now, the contact is on a very rudimentary basis through dreams starting off, but they won't come out with this. And if you look at some of them, they have such a passion now regarding this in the retirement. You look at Fravor. I mean, he started a whole organization there to do with UAP detections, and he's not the only one. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's if they've been infiltrated already from whoever is there through the dream state, and probably it's drilled down a bit further, maybe with others. And I think eventually you may see, and I'm only speculating on this, but maybe in time that there may be private interviews taking place with some of these people. Yes, that they've had contact and they're getting this, that, and the other. So don't be surprised that's will eventually come out. And I think it could happen because the way things are evolving to do with the government, and this very recent congressional report that's just come out in the last week, which has in it 2 advisory committees in it. This one advisory committee where they want advisors from, those 2 organizations that I mentioned earlier, the Galileo Project and also the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies.
We're running close to our finishing time of 9 o'clock. And I just want to say I've looked through the chat, and I think everyone that asked a question has had the opportunity. But just in case I've missed anyone, is there anyone who wants to ask a closing question of Eamonn? I have one myself, but I'm deferring to the audience. So anybody? If you give us a shout or even a wave. I can't see everybody, but Scott probably can. Anybody want to come in?
Don't think so.
Okay, then Eamonn, you've been speaking about, with Peter's prompting, you've been speaking about several leading figures in these fields of interest that you have. What about you? Are you willing to disclose any contact or experiences that have spurred you on and motivated you? Or if you say no, then I'm going to go to your childhood, because I know that the reason you got involved in astronomy was in itself an interesting story. So you have, unfortunately, only 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, well, this is really a rare one. I don't normally talk about this, but okay. Back in the early 90s, when I was researching the whole UFO area and met quite a lot of people that had the experience with encounters and so forth, I thought, well, it looks to be real, this. I was trying to figure out, well, how could I make contact? How could I do this? So I actually did explore inner space, and I can't talk about this in 2 or 3 minutes. It's likely impossible. It wouldn't justify what I'm going to sell you. But I actually created my own encounter, the first one, and it's a long story. But I was with somebody else for this. This wasn't a random situation. I knew exactly what I was doing. And I actually got, I could get downloads for dates when encounters would take place. And other people would come into position in extraordinary ways. Even my name was channeled in the United States from a person I didn't even know. And this other person was looking for me in the world and found me. So it's like as if I'd already put the communication out there. We'll call it 2 extraterrestrials for a partnership. Okay. And that was my approach in this. It wasn't like an us and them situation. I saw it as a partnership. And from that, my first one actually was, I suppose, going through a portal where I was put out for about 3 hours on top of a mountain with another person. And the construct was actually there. The other person was paralyzed. And when it finished, the other person said, I couldn't get over to you, Eamonn, because I was paralyzed by this thing over here. And I said, that's okay. Don't worry about that. I think I know what this is about. And the whole thing unfolded from one thing after the other. It would need a whole presentation itself of all the stuff I've done, actually, to do with the experiential. So it actually is not new for me. As a scientist, unfortunately, you could say 99% of scientists will not explore inner space. There's certainly those that are dealing with astronomy. I did. I want to explore it. And so I was willing to go outside the box. And I actually got the results, which were quite magical. A lot of wows in it. But it was the confirmation that the larger reality is there. It's for real. So it's no surprise when I was invited to the paranormal group, Nick, that it was fairly normal for me, all this, So.
Eamonn, I still find that I want to ask more about you, but maybe that has to wait for another evening. You've dealt with enormous universal cosmological kind of scales, and you've spoken in a way that encourages to think that global communication with ETs is being seriously considered, and that you're a co-founder of ISA and you're doing more than your bit. I would just want to highlight to the audience that I know that Eamonn has spent a lot of money, his own personal money, and relocated his home in pursuit of finding activity in hotspots. I go back to Plato. Plato said, astronomy compels the soul to look upwards and leads us from this world to another. I hope Plato was correct. And when I listen to Eamonn, I think it might just happen. So on behalf of your audience, Eamonn, with silent hand claps and thumbs up, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And over to Scott, I think, just to finish things off.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. I'd just like to give a special thank you to Nick Kyle for hosting for us this evening. And of course, thank you, Eamonn, for talking to us tonight. It was fascinating. I hope that we can see all of you back next week. We've got Professor Schwartz, who's going to be talking to us about research into technology that's being developed in order to communicate with people who have passed on. So that'll be next Tuesday at 7:30. But thanks again, and thank you, Eamonn.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye now.